I just finished reading Inferno #4 from Jonathan Hickman with art by Valerio Schiti. And normally I would do kind of a review and show some of the art and stuff like that, but I'm not really going to do that here today. There's some other things I want to talk about, just about the importance of the story, the importance of this time in X-Men as far as the era. I've already talked plenty about some of the failings, in my opinion, that have happened as far as the X-Men office under the stewardship of Legion of Doofus member supreme Jordan D. White. What's interesting about this comic book, I quite enjoyed it. I think the art is really good. I think there's a lot of satisfying conclusions, or at least as satisfying a conclusion as you truly could have gotten in a story this truncated. You could really tell reading the series of Inferno with the amount of flashbacks and new information, and not just new information, like really game-changing, like story-breaking information that really it should have been very impactful. And you could see that Jonathan Hickman had laid out a path, and these things were going to happen along the way. He never got to truly do that and execute it. We're going to talk about that here a little bit more here in a bit. So we kind of had to throw it in flashbacks and not pay off the story exactly the way that he wanted to, but pay it off the way that he could, or at least the best way that he could. So in that fact, I'm extremely grateful that we ended up getting this Inferno series. I think it's an ending, right? I think for a lot of people that were so excited about House of X and Powers of 10 and the potential that it represented, this new dawn, a new day in X-Men, where it didn't have to suck for 10 years, that we could conceivably get good quality X-Men that were different in tone, but still awesome in quality moving forward. We didn't quite get that, but we do have a pretty solid narrative, and I think a jumping off point for a lot of people. I'm not personally just going to jump off all of X-Men. I do have a comic book YouTube channel, and I do talk about X-Men every single week on it, so I will be checking in here and there, taking my opportunities, picking my spots, if you may, on the comic series that I think have some potential, that are paying off some things that have been introduced that I personally have liked. You know, there are still some hanging plot threads out there from X-Force, Wolverine. Sounds like Legion of X is going to kind of be something I'm interested in. But I don't feel a need or anything close to a want to just fully invest in the entire X-Men line like I did the way I felt following House of X Powers of 10. And I know a lot, and I do mean a lot, of comic book readers felt the same way. As I've mentioned many times, and that was confirmed by multiple retailers, you know, people were coming back after checking out comic books for upwards of a decade, because the premise and the promise of what House of X Powers of 10 represented was so strong and compelling that they couldn't say no. They couldn't deny what it was and what the vision that Jonathan Hickman was laying out, and they wanted to be a part of it. Unfortunately, we never really got that, but we did get hints of it here and there. If you read House of X Powers of 10, if you read that, that one issue about the Children of the Vault early on in the X-Men run, I believe it's issue 5. I might be wrong on that one. Then there's a Nimrod issue. I believe that one's issue 6. And then you jump all the way over to issues, I believe it's 18, 19, and 20. Those are really compelling, well-executed comic book stories that really fall right in line with what House of X and Powers of 10, what they felt like they were going to be. And then if you throw this Inferno story on there, you got yourself a pretty damn good comic story that I think a lot of people will enjoy. One of the interesting things that comes out of this Inferno story is that we have been living or reading a divergent timeline. The revelation that Omega Sentinel is from the future, and in that future, the mutants win. They overcome the humans and the post-humans, the robots. That was a pretty big revelation. That would have been a game changer. That would have been really, if you think about what they're doing now with the 10 Lives, 10 Deaths of Wolverine, like that's kind of the same format of House of X Powers of 10. if that was the climax and the big reveal in the second to last, or even maybe the last issue of maybe a 6 or even a 12 part. I would hope it wouldn't be that big, like a 6-part weekly miniseries that Hickman wrote. Like that would have been jaw dropping, and you would have had people just as excited before, just for that one moment and that reveal that it ends up leading to. And it's kind of, it does suck that in Inferno, it's almost a footnote. I mean, it's certainly there, and they do explain with the timelines, kind of how it worked. But did anyone get to really think about it? We didn't even get time to breathe because he had so much stuff that he needed to talk about and to explain how this story was going to make sense in the end. We didn't get to sit there and think about the revelation that what Moira and Charles and Xavier were doing worked. At least in the original timeline, they were going to win. They had changed the actions and the future of Krakoa and the destiny of the mutant, race on Earth to where they were no longer going to lose either to humans or to robots or post-humans in the end. That was a pretty cool revelation. Can you imagine if that was like the big reveal at the end of one of these exciting, like end of year, maybe like end of year 1 or end of year 2 series that really put a capstone on this 3-year plan that Hickman was going to be executing? People would have been talking for months about that and how exciting it was. And unfortunately, we never got that. That was like the thing about House of X and Powers of 10 that was the most exciting, was every time an issue came out, everybody was reading that first. That was the first thing when you got your comic books home and it's in your read pile. That's the one you hit first because everyone's going to be talking about it. You don't want to get spoiled. And then everyone was talking about the possibilities of what does this mean and what's it leading up to. And we had theories. I mean, we had a show here every week. We would just talk about the theories and the implications of all the stuff that we were reading. And it was so much fun. It was so exciting. It was invigorating to be excited about a comic book like that. And that moment from Inferno would have been that all over again. We would have got to experience, how exciting and why House of X and Powers of 10 was truly successful and engrossing in the first place. So in that respect, it is a bit of a bummer, but we did get to see it. We did get to see that Hickman really did have a long plan laid out. This wasn't a short-term, hey, let's see if this sticks. It was like, this is what I'm going to do. People are going to love it. And this is going to be like the sweeping tale. And of course, there was always that hanging thread out there. It's like, well, once Moira dies, or she dies of old age, everything's going to reset anyway. It doesn't matter if they win. Like, how are they going to do it? Of course, they had introduced early on in House of X Powers of 10, I believe it was in their third life. It was a second or third life. I think it's her third, where Moira herself had actually cured the mutant gene, was able to turn, well, not turn, I guess it was to prevent the mutant gene from ever kicking in and keep them human. So there was that out, and they chose not to take it there, but it is certainly addressed in this final issue here. But, Forge also had mentioned, during the course of events that he had invented a weapon. We'd seen this in the past in X-Men. It was a good callback that would, make mutants human, and that plays right into this. So Moira is cured. There's no going back. This timeline, and it's kind of weird that we're in an alternate timeline already. So we were in a timeline, Omega Sentinel comes back, and now we're in a variant timeline. Things get a little bit confusing. It's set in stone. There's no resetting it anymore. I think a lot of people have been waiting. Like, when are they going to reset it? When are they going to kill Moira off? How are they going to do it? So we can go back and maybe undo some of this stuff. So that obviously is not going to be happening. And I think that's probably a good move. This needed to happen. Obviously, that was part of the plan. It was one of the mysteries that Jonathan Hickman had put out there that ended up paying off. And that's like the cool thing about the other mystery that he paid off. He didn't even know it was there. And of course, there was the revelation. And we know that Doug and Krakoa had a special bond. And we remember him touching that leaf, and there was a techno-organic virus, certainly very reminiscent of Warlock's like texture and feel. And it turns out, he's, I don't know, he fed Warlock to Krakoa, so they were integrated together, and that's one of the ways he was able to communicate. but it was also able to see the no place, and he knew everything that was going on all along. Another one of these really cool revelations that would have had us talking about, what's Doug going to do? He's the ultimate wild card. And that's exactly how it plays off here in Inferno number 4, as things are playing out and they've cured Moira and it's time to kill her, because that's what Mystique and Destiny are planning to do. He enters the fray, and all of a sudden Destiny doesn't know what's going to happen. She's like, he's not supposed to be here. We had no idea that this was a part of the of what was going to unfold. I'm completely blind as to what the future is, and I don't know what to do. And he shows up. They're like, well, we'll kill him. But it turns out his wife, that was one of the Iraqi mutants, Bay the Bodacious, something like that. She had some stupid adjective name that was on there, the Iraqi mutants' names. And then obviously he had Warlock and he had Krakoa behind him, so they couldn't do it. And then it became clear you could kill Moira, you could kill Doug, which in one case would have meant the loss of Destiny. In the other case would have meant the loss of Mystique. Those two have been through so much together and worked so hard to finally get together. Obviously, they're not going to risk losing each other, so they end up having to take choice number 3, which was let Moira escape with their life. And it's like the Moira thing is really probably the most disappointing. We just never saw her from her. She just checked out for like a year and a half. You knew she was in this no place, but you didn't know what she was doing and what kind of influence or impact she was having on Krakoa and the decisions. I mean, you knew that she was the reason that Destiny wasn't coming back, but you never really got to investigate it further. And obviously, we did hear from Jonathan Hickman recently. He went on a podcast and talked about a lot of the plans that didn't come to fruition. And Al Ewing was supposed to come online to write the Moira X series that was rumored from the very beginning, and we're never going to get. I do find that a disappointing. It's just one of those, that gray area out there that never got to be explored. Will it be explored in 30 years? Maybe, with Marvel going back and writing stuff in continuity, because there's so many, blank slates in this story that Hickman didn't get to flesh out fully, that it's ripe for possibility to just go back and fill in some of these blanks. And I think people will still be excited for it. Because I do think on retrospect, when people look back at it, this story, and at least the parts where Hickman was able to continue the story, will be looked on very fondly. I don't think the rest of the stuff around it will be, and I'll get to that here in a second. But the Moira stuff is, it's a lot of what this Hickman era ends up being. One of the greatest what if stories in Marvel Comics history. I've said it before. The potential of what might have been. I don't think it was ever going to go down as the greatest X-Men story of all time, but it could have went down as one of the 2 or 3 greatest X-Men stories of all time. And it's not going to happen. Obviously, there are many more hanging plot threads out there that we never really got into, the Phalanx and Dominion. It sounds like they're going to hit on that a little bit in 2022. But do you want to see that executed by anybody but Hickman? I don't. I mean, I think Kieran Gillen's a pretty good writer. I think Doc's crazy. Let's put that one out there. I love you, Doc, but you're nuts if you think Kieran Gillen can't write a comic book. But I don't think he can write this comic book or that story the way that Jonathan Hickman would. And I don't think that he can continue the story here after Inferno, which it is certainly hinted at the end of Inferno number 4, that this is going to be played out in Immortal X-Men. I don't want Kieran Gillen's take on this stuff. I want Jonathan Hickman's take on it. I think that's, that was the secret sauce, was Jonathan Hickman, Pepe the Raz, RB Silva, and Marte Gracia. Obviously here with this Inferno series, we got Stefano Caselli, who's a great artist, and he's worked with Hickman a lot in the past. So I thought that worked out. And Valeria Shitty was fine, but I really wish they would have kept those original 4 creators together, the writer, the 2 artists, and the colorist. And I think they would have made so much more money and made so much more of an impact on X-Men history and X-Men lore. But the stuff that we did get, I have to admit, I'm still frustrated with Inferno. I'm not going to go back and say, it was perfect from beginning to end. It's still frustrating because he was having to backtrack and throw in all these flashbacks for revelations that were supposed to have already happened within the course of the story before he got to actually execute this Inferno story, which obviously isn't quite exactly the way he wanted to begin with. But it is still satisfying. it still does pay off a lot of what people were looking forward to begin with. So in that fact, I do think Jonathan Hickman's time, or the comics he wrote associated with House of X Powers of 10, really delivered in every single time. You got the first story, you got about, it's 5 or 6 issues really that deal in the core components of House of X Powers of 10 of his X-Men run, and they were all fantastic. We did have, he did address the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, the original 4 Horsemen, within 10 of Swords, but that was just such a jumbled mess where it was this weird mishmash with that crap that T.D. Howard was doing on Excalibur, that it made it like it ended up being kind of an empty thing. Like, you could see what he wanted to do, and it was paid off to a degree, and we got some answers or whatnot, but like, I really wish this other crap hadn't been in there, and we would have gotten that story, because it would have been that much stronger, and Hickman wouldn't have had to compromise his work to work with a lesser creator. And I do think, the interference from Jordan White and other, executives from Marvel, and specifically all the people that were in the X-Men Slack chat and the other creators in there, that watered down the line and kind of ruined the plans of Jonathan Hickman. That's the really big disappointment. And Hickman himself, he talks about it. I'm going to talk about this stuff more with Doc on Sunday and This Week in X-Men. He talked a lot, and I don't want to go into all the details of all the plans that didn't come into fruition and what we think about them. But at during this podcast he was on, he does talk about what was changed about his plans. And he essentially says, as far as House of X Powers of 10, when he pitched it, there were a few notes about, tone, and maybe this is too dark and need to do this or this. And he cleaned them up. But for the most part, House of X and Powers of 10 played out essentially exactly the way it was supposed to. What's interesting, and I'm going to quote it here from the podcast itself, is when he talks about what happens afterwards. And a lot of people have disagreed with me. They're like, you don't know what you're talking about, Wes. This is exactly the way it was supposed to happen. It wasn't. You could tell from the beginning things felt odd, and they were going off the tracks as soon as they started announcing all these new series. It was too much too soon. And then obviously Jonathan Hickman did have a couple of interviews once it was announced that he was leaving X-Men, and he'd said it, the line had kind of got hijacked, but he addresses it once again in this podcast. And I will read the quote here and just discuss it for a little bit before we sign off, because this is going a little longer than I anticipated. I just really love the House of X Powers of 10 and everything that it, like the promise of what it could have been. This is what he said. Once we got into the writer's room and it became this giant thing, even bigger than what we thought it was going to be, because House of X and Powers of 10 were such a success sales. He's got to say success. I'm going to say that Jonathan Hickman didn't say it that way, and that it was that they wrote it down wrong. All of those books launched with incredible velocity, and then the line continued to grow, and then the world changed in the middle of it. It just became a completely different thing than what I originally planned. But I think the soul of what the experiment was, which was, can we do an integrated line of comics? I feel like that was a success. So he feels like it was a success. They were able to launch an entire line of X-Men comics, and they're integrated to a degree. That certainly happened, and there's been a few events, and they were pretty much all crossovers and whatnot. But it says right there, it became a completely different thing than what was originally planned. We never got the Jonathan Hickman X-Men story. And that's what people signed on for. That's what people were excited about in House of X Powers of 10. Nobody was excited for the Tini Howard take on Otherworld that could affect, his world. I mean, I like Ben Percy, but nobody was like, what would make this Jonathan Hickman X-Men stuff even better? Ben Percy's take. No one said that. And certainly no one was like, fuck, we need to get Jerry Duggan in here and see what he could do with this. Jordan, get on that, The only thing that could make this better is Jerry Duggan. Really, the only thing that could make it worse was for Jordan White, Vita Ayala, Tini Howard, Jerry Duggan, Ben Percy, some of the writers who I respect and think are quality, coming in and diluting it and just kind of changing what was supposed to happen. Nobody came into that series and produced record sales with the promise or hope that Vidal would come in and hijack the line. No one came in with the hope that Jerry Duggan would come in and explore his take on what Jonathan Hickman had created. Nobody was going, God, I love what Hickman created here, but man, once T.D. Howard gets on the line, that's when it's really going to pop. And really, I can understand why they did it. You know, it was a successful relaunch of the X-Men universe, and people were really excited. You needed to be bigger, right? But you needed to maintain the integrity of the story and the integrity of the vision from Jonathan Hickman. And that's really where the ball was dropped. And I personally, I lay that exclusively and 100% on the feet of Jordan D. White, the X-Men group editor. You could say I'm wrong. Okay, you're more than welcome to go in the comments section and try and change my mind. It's going to be a hard sled. You know, I bust his chops and I point out what a destructive force and his incompetence as a leader as often as I can here on the channel, because I truly believe he is a detriment and an impediment to the success not only of X-Men, but to Marvel Comics in the future. There will be less Marvel Comics readers because Jordan White's time in the company. And I firmly believe that. So all the things that didn't get to happen, maybe Jonathan Hickman needed to speak louder or have his voice raised higher. But, you know, he is a creator. These are his peers. Was he supposed to say, screw all you guys, you know, keep your mouth shut and I will approve your stories if I just decided to? It was on Jordan White to manage the line and say, listen, guys, I understand that this is all very exciting and you have things that you personally would like to do, but they have to maintain within the vision and the story structure that Jonathan Hickman has already laid out. And if they don't, they're just not going to happen. Unfortunately, there were no leaders in the room. It put Jonathan Hickman in a weird spot. He did the best that he could. He obviously stepped away gracefully, or at least as much grace as he could. And now we have a lesser X-Men line. But we do get Inferno, and I definitely recommend everyone read it. If you liked House of X Powers of 10, you're going to like this. We did get those issues 18, 19, and 20 of X-Men. I believe it's 5 and 6. If you liked House of X Powers of 10, but you didn't know what to do, go read those issues in Inferno, and I think you'll be happy with the end result. But I truly do believe this is a jumping off point for a lot of X-Men readers. You know, they lost faith along the way. They've been waiting for a reason to either come back in, all in, or get all out. And I think, in my mind, Inferno is the reason to be all out on X-Men right now.